Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel and to another soft-spoken true crime video. If you are new to my channel, this is an ASMR channel, but I choose to do my true crime videos in a soft-spoken voice so that if you don't like whispers, you can hopefully still enjoy them. Today's case is on the unsolved disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit. And if you watched my last true crime videos, which was a two-parter about the murder of Michelle Martinko, the name Jodi Huisentruit may sound familiar because she did in fact come up in Michelle's case due to a possible connection with Michelle's murderer. So today's case is going to be shorter, quite significantly shorter than my Michelle videos, because as I said, this is an unsolved disappearance, so unfortunately we don't have all the information and all the answers. But nevertheless, I do hope that you enjoy this video. It's important to get Jodi's name out there even all these years later, and she still has many people fighting for her and wanting to be her voice, so I hope to add to that in some way. And I just wanted to mention that in these videos I mean absolutely no disrespect to the victims or their loved ones, and let's just remember to always keep it respectful in the comments. But with that being said, let's get right into the case. Jodi Sue Huisentruit was born on June 5th, 1968, to her parents Maurice and Imogen Huisentruit. She lived in Long Prairie, Minnesota, where she was raised with her two older sisters, Joanne and Jill. Joanne was 18 years old at the time of Jodi's birth, and she said that Jodi brought so much joy to their family. Not a lot of information is out there about Jodi's childhood, but in high school Jodi was known for her amazing golfing abilities, which led to her team winning the state Class A tournament in 1985 and 1986. Jodi's golfing talents were very evident to everyone around her, and she was considered to be a very promising golfing up-and-comer. And while Jodi would continue to golf throughout her life, she knew from a young age that she had dreams of being a news anchor. After graduating high school, Jodi went on to study mass communications and speech communication at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, where she also had a starring role on the school's TV station. She graduated from the university with a bachelor's degree in 1990, and her first job after graduating college was actually with Northwest Airlines, but she soon started her broadcasting career with KGAN, a CBS affiliate and local news channel in Cedar Rapids, which, if you watched my last videos, will also sound familiar because this was actually the location of Michelle Martinko's murder. There Jodi worked as the bureau chief, but she then returned to Minnesota for a job with an ABC affiliate, KSAX, in Alexandria, before moving back to Iowa to work for KIMT, another CBS affiliate in Mason City. At KIMT, Jodi worked as a producer as well as a news anchor, and she hosted the morning and noon shows. She was just 25 years old at this time. For a lot of people, Jodi was the first person they saw in the morning, and even though it was just on TV, she was an important part of people's lives and someone that many viewers even considered to be like a friend. Doug Murbach was the news director at KIMT when Jodi worked there, and he describes her as, quote, kind of a bright light in the morning to get people started for the day. Jodi's best friend from high school, Stacy Steinman, said, quote, everyone she met loved her. Do you know how many people think she was their best friend? Jodi was often described as bubbly, energetic, and effervescent. She was well loved at the station and by everyone who knew her because she was such a personable, sweet person that everybody wanted to be friends with. She also stood out because not only was she a beautiful blonde with a gorgeous smile that lit up her face, but she had a very distinctive Minnesotan accent, which she was actually working on refining, but it just made her all the more lovable. And of course, as usual, I will be putting images of Jodi up on the screen so that you can see for yourself. But Jodi's sister, Joanne, said that she feared that Jodi may be too personable and said, quote, she was definitely too trusting. Joanne also said that she was worried that on the news, Jodi was, quote, revealing too much, maybe of what she did day to day. Jodi was very friendly and open on the news, and with so many eyes watching her, it wouldn't be hard for one obsessive viewer to perhaps piece together the details of what Jodi shared about her life here and there. One example was shown on the 48 Hours episode on Jodi, when she said during a broadcast that she lived near a big swimming pool and could always hear the children playing. Jodi lived by herself at Key Apartments on North Kentucky Avenue in Mason City. 3 months after her disappearance, Jodi's family allowed a local reporter to take video footage inside the apartment so you can actually see exactly what it looked like, and the footage can be found quite easily online. Jodi would normally leave her apartment in the very early hours of the morning so that she could arrive at work at her usual time of 3:30 a.m. This is pretty standard for morning news anchors, particularly because Jodi's morning slot was at 6 a.m, and this was something that she didn't mind at all because she just loved her job and loved her show. A producer at KIMT at the time of Jodi's appearance, Amy Coons, said, quote, she loves her show. She calls it her show, you know. She wouldn't miss it for anything. And that's why when 4:10 rolled around on the morning of June 27th, 1995, Amy Coons knew that something was up. Jodi had run late before, so Amy rang Jodi to see if this was the case that morning, and Jodi answered, sounding as though she may have just woken up. It was a brief conversation. Amy had just asked Jodi if she was awake, and Jodi had asked her a few questions about the show that morning before telling Amy, quote, I'll be right there. But by 5:30 a.m, Jodi still hadn't arrived, and this time she wasn't answering her phone either. When 6 a.m. came, Amy ended up having to step up and deliver the news in Jodi's place, and the police were called shortly after 7 a.m. The police went around to Jodi's apartment, but when they got there, she wasn't home. Her beloved red Mazda Miata was still parked in the car park, however, and the police quickly realized that something was wrong. When scattered around it, they found her shoes, hairdryer, and keys. They also discovered drag marks nearby, which were thought to be signs of a struggle. It was clear that this had now become a crime scene, so police tested the outside of Jodi's car for fingerprints and discovered one palm print on it. A search of Jodi's apartment was also done with special canine units, and the banks of the nearby Winnebago River were also searched, but nothing came up. Police then went to the station and did a thorough search of the newsroom, particularly Jodi's desk, looking for any evidence of an obsessive viewer that Jodi may have had. That evening, Jodi's co-workers had to report on Jodi's disappearance, which they said was one of the hardest things they'd ever done in their career. Robin Wolfram, who was a fellow news anchor and close friend of Jodi's, said about reporting the story, quote, I don't know what it looked like to the viewers, but I just know inside it was a mess. Everybody at the newsroom was absolutely devastated, and as news got out to the public, many in the community were as well. In the next few days there was still no sign of Jodi, and each day the news anchors at KIMT reported that Jodi was still missing and appealed to the public for information and for their prayers. By June 28, 1995, the police had decided to enlist the FBI for some assistance in Jodi's case, feeling that they were somewhat out of their depth. Her disappearance had also become national news by this point. Robin Wolfram spoke of her and Jodi's dreams of making it big on national TV and said at this moment, quote, "It just struck me as so sad, and I was just sick. And I thought, this is not what we meant about being on national news." Police Chief Jack Schleiper told the public, quote, "We do have things that would make us believe that there could be foul play here." And he also revealed that Jodi had made a previous report in October the previous year about a possible stalker. She had reported the incident to the police after feeling as though she was being followed while she was out jogging. Her sister Joanne described it as, quote, "She got shook up one day when she was out hiking or jogging on a trail and a black truck had followed her." This happened 9 months before Jodi's disappearance, but the police were never able to get to the bottom of this, and Jodi had not made another report since. On June 30th, 1995, the fire department furthered their search of the Winnebago River, now preparing to find a body that had perhaps floated to the surface. And on July 1st, Chief Jack Schleiber told the public that they were now officially classifying Jodi's disappearance as an abduction. Several neighbors had told police that they had seen a white van in the car park the day of Jodi's disappearance and had heard a scream around the time that she would have been abducted, but no one had called for help. At this point, police believed that whoever had taken Jodi had most likely known her schedule and could have been either a stalker or someone that Jodi knew. They decided to look into Jodi's last days and the people who were in Jodi's life who were potentially suspicious, and one name kept coming up: John Van Sice. John Van Sice was a close friend of Jodi's, who claimed to have been the last person to see her alive, which brought him to the forefront of the police's radar. John had actually told Robin Wolfram in an interview with KIMT about Jodi's disappearance that she had visited him the night before. Jodi had actually played in a golf tournament the day of her disappearance, and John said that later that evening she had come over to his house, which was only about 5 minutes away from her apartment. Robin had said that she found the whole interview with John Van Sice to be unnerving, and that he was, quote, "way too happy and gleeful." John Van Sice was 22 years older than Jodi and had said in the interview, quote, "She was like a daughter to me. She was like my own child. I treated her like my own child." But Robin has suspected for a long time that John had feelings for Jodi, feelings that were not mutual. She grew particularly suspicious of John at the point of the interview when John told her that he had named his boat after Jodi. Robin later said, quote, "When he said I named my boat after her, that's when I said, oh, that's an obsession. I remember holding onto the microphone and just feeling so ill at ease and thinking to myself, I think he might have done it." So let's talk a little more about who John Van Sice was. When Jodi met John, he was a recently divorced seed salesman who was said to be in a rough place in his life, seemingly due to the divorce and because he'd recently had to have a breathalyzer installed in his van due to a string of drink driving arrests. John had actually once lived in Jodi's apartment complex, but they'd actually met at a bar when John bought Jodi and her friend Annie Cruz a drink. Annie told 48 Hours about the night they all met, saying, quote, "He offered to buy us both a drink, and we just started talking to him and didn't know how we felt about him, and then we met him again and again." So John Van Sice became a part of Jodi's circle of friends, and he was particularly close with her due to her friendly, welcoming and trusting nature. But according to Annie, it was clear that John had an interest in Jodi that went beyond just friendship, but Jodi just chose to brush it off. Annie said, quote, She knew he had an interest, but just blew it off. You know, he's like a father to me. She made that mention quite a few times. Jodi even said as much to John Van Sice, but some of the friends in their circle said that he didn't seem to get the picture. 48 Hours also spoke to Jodi's best friends, Stacey Steinman and Kim Feist, about their thoughts on John at the time when Jodi and he were friends. Stacey Steinman said, quote, "When she told us he named his boat after her, we go, okay, Jodi, this is a little much." And Kim Feist continued, quote, "That was our stop. I don't know, something's weird." And of course, Robin Wolfram had felt suspicious of John even before Jodi's disappearance, and had said, quote, "I cautioned her. I said, Jodi, there's gonna come a point in time when he's gonna want more." But Jodi had just laughed it off and didn't take her friend's concerns all too seriously. A few weeks before Jodi's disappearance, John had helped to plan and throw a birthday party for her. She and her friends had often water skied off John's boat, so they had a water ski cake, and it was said to be a great night, and no one reported anything out of the ordinary. The party was actually reportedly the reason that Jodi had gone over to John's house the night before her disappearance, in order to watch a videotape of the surprise party. John said, quote, "We watched the tape and we chuckled, we laughed, we giggled, we hee-hawed, we did everything. We said we're going to cut this portion out of the tape, we're going to cut that portion out of the tape, and then we'd laugh about it." He claims that Jodi left his house at about 10 p.m. that night, and this is why he claimed to have been the last one to see her before she was abducted. After Jodi's disappearance, John Van Sice did an interview with KAMT, like I mentioned, which is when Robin Wolfram interviewed him. By this point, the police had already learned about John and Jodi's friendship and questioned him. John told KIMT, quote, "They've interviewed me twice, but they haven't made any indication I'm a suspect." But even though he claimed to not have been a suspect, Robin Wolfram and Doug Murbeck said it was as though he really wanted to be interviewed. John Van Sice also did an interview with 48 Hours in 1995, where he once again came across as odd. He told 48 Hours, quote, "She'll be back, just have to have patience. You can't be down because Jodi wouldn't want it." And quote, "She wouldn't want us to sit around home and cry and sob. She'd want us to be out having fun, because that was her." Funnily enough, immediately after he said this, Annie Cruz, who was with John in the interview, corrected him saying, "is her," as in corrected him from saying that was her. But Annie wasn't suspicious of John at this point, specifically saying in the 48 Hours interview that she did not think he would ever harm her. Quote, "Without a doubt, I have no question that there's no possibility in my mind that he could ever." In the same 48 Hours show, John Van Sice met with Joanne and some of Jodi's other family members. In this segment of the show, John says to the family about his relationship with Jodi, quote, "I just loved watching her have fun," and quote, "I tried to watch over her. I tried to check on her once in a while. Not all the time, just once in a while. See how she's getting along." He even told the family that if they find any men's clothes in Jodi's apartment, then they were his, because if he had a shirt she liked, he would give it to her. This once again struck the people around John as very strange, and Joanne would later say, "In my mind, there's a good chance that he is linked to Jodi's case, some way or other, due to his obvious obsession with Jodi." So with all this suspicion pointing towards John, it's clear that he would be at the top of police's list. But John did have an alibi for the morning of Jodi's abduction, at least partially. A friend of his, LaDonna Woodford, had come forward and told police that he was with her that morning on their routine morning walk. But the pair would go for walks later on in the morning than when Jodi would have left for work. LaDonna still insists that John couldn't have done it, however, because she called his house at 6 a.m. to confirm that they were going on their walk, and claimed that when he answered it, it sounded as though he'd just woken up. LaDonna also insists that even though John lived just 5 minutes from Jodi's apartments, he couldn't possibly have had time to abduct and potentially murdered her between 4:10 a.m., which is when Jodi last spoke to her co-worker, and 6 a.m., which is when LaDonna had called John. This is a valid point, and LaDonna also brought up that everybody at Jodi's apartments knew him because he had once lived there, so it would be very risky for him to abduct her outside of them. Roughly 2 years after Jodi's disappearance, LaDonna would be approached by the FBI and called to testify in front of a grand jury for John Van Sice because police were trying to indict him. She was shocked, but went in front of the grand jury and was questioned for 5 hours about John Van Sice, who ultimately wasn't indicted. LaDonna truly felt that the police had unfairly targeted John Van Sice and said, quote, "It's just so horrible what they've done to him. He lost his best friend, and it's sad. It's really sad." She did, however, say one thing that could have unintentionally caused further suspicion of John. Wow, those birds are really going crazy. She said that John had told her that Jodi's prized red Mazda Miata had been given to her by a boyfriend, but that she didn't really want it and that she was going to give it back. But this wasn't true at all. Jodi had worked hard for that car and was very proud of it. The only time she had seen John Lassar, the man who had sold the car to her, was when they met for him to literally give her the car keys when she bought it. But this comment about Jodi having been given the car from a boyfriend lines up with John's behaviour surrounding Jodi and other men in general. Many years later, Annie Cruz would come to realise that his behaviour was odd, unnerving even. Annie recalled that when they were out, if Jodi was talking to somebody else, John would always swoop in. She said, quote, "He wanted to make sure that everybody knew Jodi was his." Over the years, Annie had grown suspect of John and believed that he could have been involved with Jodi's disappearance, with the motive being Jodi potentially rejecting him. She said, quote, "That's the only thing I could think of. But the thing that has always puzzled me, like why in the morning in the parking lot?" And this is definitely a question worth asking, but unfortunately it is one that we just don't have the answers for. Police were not able to find any solid evidence on John, and he did pass a polygraph test. 3 years after Jodi's disappearance, Caroline Lowe, an investigative reporter at WCCO-TV in Minneapolis, was covering the crimes of a man named Tony Jackson, who was accused of sexually assaulting 4 women in 18 days. Tony Jackson had been a star college basketball player, but he had a terrible temper and was known to snap and become violent, so he eventually got kicked out of college. After this, he enrolled in North Iowa Community College in Mason City, where he showed an interest in broadcasting. So, during this time, he was of course watching the news a lot and intently studying the craft of broadcasting, which is when he may have come across Jodi Huisentruit. At the time of her abduction, Tony was actually living within 2 blocks of the TV station that Jodi worked at, and he had a history of stalking his victims before assaulting them. Because of this, Caroline Lowe believes that it would have been very easy for him to learn Jodi's schedule and target her. It was also discovered that just 5 days before Jodi's abduction, Tony had gone through a very turbulent breakup with his girlfriend, during which he became extremely angry and violent towards her. Caroline Lowe spoke with his girlfriend and was shocked at how similar she looked to Jodi Huisentruit. His girlfriend told Caroline that she had actually decided to get back with Tony sometime after they had broken up, but after this he had gotten violent with her once again and actually choked her, so she left him and he was arrested for domestic violence. However, she ultimately decided not to go through with the charges. After he was released, he moved to Minnesota, which is where he committed the 4 known sexual assaults, and he was again arrested in 1997. When police pulled him over in his car, they found some very disturbing things in his car, including rope and duct tape, which the police concluded was essentially his rape kit. Thankfully, Tony Jackson was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, but while in prison, he apparently told another inmate that he had abducted and killed a news anchor. The inmate actually said that Tony had written a rap about the woman being buried at a farm near a silo in a town called Tiffin, which is only a few hours away from Mason City. On hearing about this, Caroline Lowe decided to go to Tiffin with law enforcement, who brought cadaver dogs in hopes of finding something that could link to Jodi's disappearance. They did locate a silo in Tiffin, and 2 of the 3 dogs that were there alerted that there was something around some wooden boards at the silo, so these were sent off to a crime lab. But unfortunately, nothing was found, and this ended up leading nowhere. By the way, I'm sorry if you can hear my sister's dog. He's decided to join us. On May 5th, 1999, the Mason City Police released the following statement. Quote, After conducting a thorough investigation which included interviews, crime laboratory analysis, records review, and polygraph examination, Tony Jackson is not considered at this time a viable suspect in the investigation. Caroline Lowe still isn't entirely convinced, however, and neither is Jodi's sister Joanne, who says that Tony is still on her list of potential suspects. But with the police coming to a dead end, there was really nothing further that they could do, and sadly, years went by with no real leads or movement in Jodi's case. On May 14th, 2001, Jodi's family made the incredibly difficult decision to have her declared legally dead so that they were able to settle her estate. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of movement on the case since then, other than one odd occurrence in June of 2008 when 84 pages of Jodi's private journal was leaked to the public. The pages were mailed to a local news station, but nobody knows who sent them or what their intention was in doing so. There was no return address, but it was postmarked from Waterloo, Iowa. This was very odd because Jodi's journal has been in possession of law enforcement since the beginning of the investigation. So some people actually speculate that the police station leaked it for some reason. There has also been talk of poor police work in general in Jodi's case. Jodi's friend Annie Cruz said, quote, "I think this was a very big case. I think this is something they were not accustomed to dealing with." She recalled that from the start, the police hadn't seemed to have processed the crime scene the way they should have, remembering that the parking lot where Jodi was abducted wasn't even entirely taped off for the first day or so. There was nothing stopping someone from walking onto the crime scene and unintentionally or intentionally leaving false evidence, or even taking evidence away if they knew what they were looking for. There is also the matter of Jodi's car, which is the biggest piece of physical evidence in this case and is essentially the crime scene itself, but the police gave the car back to Jodi's family just a couple of months after her disappearance. When asked by 48 Hours interviewer Jim Axelrod if the initial investigators had returned the car too quickly, Chief Jeff Brinkley agreed that they might have. He declined to answer whether Tony Jackson or John Van Sice were current persons of interest in the case. However, in 2017, the website findjodi.com, which I will touch on soon, released that John Van Sice was still very much on the police's radar, and the Mason City Police had obtained a search warrant for GPS information on 2 of his vehicles. The search warrant is sealed, so we don't know what they found, if anything, but Caroline Lowe believes that they were looking for info that could lead to Jodi's body. Chief Jeff Brinkley said, however, quote, "We didn't get any information that was useful." But when asked by Jim Axelrod if they had something, he said, "Not completely, no. I don't think we do yet, but I think we're very close." Jim Axelrod also approached John Van Sice for 48 Hours to ask what he knew of Jodi's appearance, but he refused to talk to him, just as he has refused all interviews since the ones immediately following Jodi's disappearance. And I should mention that this 48 hours interview was very recent. I believe it was beginning of 2020, but it was in the last few years, if not. Very recently, another potential suspect has been speculated about, Jerry Burns. So if you watched my last true crime videos, you will be familiar with the name and his connection to this case. Jerry Burns was the murderer of Michelle Martinko, who he brutally stabbed to death on December 19th, 1979, in her car in the car park of a local mall. While brutally stabbing Michelle, Jerry cut himself, which eventually would be what solved the case 39 years later through DNA evidence. It was also discovered that he had hundreds of searches for things such as strangling, stabbing, and raping blonde women, so he clearly had a sick, disturbing desire for this, even all those years later. There are clearly a lot of similarities between the two cases, with both women being young and blonde, and they were both attacked in car parks. At the time of Jodi's abduction, Jerry Burns lived just 2 hours away from Mason City in Manchester, Iowa. What really got people speculating about Jerry Burns being responsible for Jodi's disappearance, however, was that while being questioned by police in 2018, he brought up Jodi's case unprompted, which was incredibly suspicious. So once again, you'll be more familiar with this if you watched my videos on Michelle Martinko's case. Essentially, when the police approached him to ask about Michelle Martinko, he denied knowing much, but randomly brought up Jodi's case, saying that he had seen things about that in the news recently. So very suspicious behavior from a murderer. Now going back for a moment to findjodi.com. This was a website created in 2003 by journalists Josh Benson and Gary Peterson, who were later joined by fellow reporters including Caroline Lowe and a retired detective, all of whom had the goal of keeping Jodi's story alive and solving the case. Caroline Lowe said, quote, "I may be walking around with my cane and maybe in a wheelchair, but I am staying on this until we find Jodi." On June 5th, 2018, which would have been Jodi's 50th birthday, FindJodi.com unveiled 4 billboards around Mason City, hoping to bring in the lead that could crack the case. And that is essentially all of the information that we have on Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance. I'm really hoping that this will be another case that is able to be solved with DNA evidence. There are a few suspects, and I'm hoping that they may have enough in that palm print to be able to find something. But unfortunately, poor police work, especially giving the car, Jodi's car, which was essentially the crime scene, giving that back means that there's not a lot more DNA evidence that can be collected at this point. But I and many other people who have heard of Jodi's case are still holding on to hope. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed hearing about Jodi's story. It's really important to keep these alive, especially these cold cases. And yeah, once again, I just really hope that this is one that can be solved. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it and comment down below what you thought of the case or future cases that you'd like me to cover. I really enjoy doing these true crime cases. They're my favorite ones to make, but I do other ASMR content as well, so feel free to leave me a comment below with what you'd like to see. Oh, and please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. It really boosts my day, and I appreciate each and every one of you. But with that being said, I think this brings us to the end of the video. I really hope that you've enjoyed this one, guys. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye.